Welcome to Leadership Unlearned and Reframed. We're going to spend this hour discussing leadership and all the elements of it. When I speak about leadership, I'm not only speaking about a role in an organization. I am inviting you to take up your leadership mantle wherever you are. You could be the leader of your family. What would change if that were to happen? You could lead in your community groups. You can lead in your place of worship or even on your local netball team. This is what we're talking about, and we are inviting you to examine your beliefs around leadership, and we're hoping to debunk some parts of it. We're going to offer new thoughts, new insights, and probably things you've heard before, those will be reinforced. And because we're taking away from you with the unlearning, we're also offering something to replace it. So we're offering new perspectives, new thoughts to help you reframe and step into your leadership. So welcome to Leadership Unlearned and Reframed. And our guest today is no stranger to me. He appeared on our podcast before, and he is Karl Hebenstreit. Karl, welcome and tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Maxine. Wonderful to be with you again. And thank you for creating this new venue and way to reach out to everyone and being more inclusive to everyone. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you and everything that you do. My name is Karl Hebenstreit, as you said. I am an author, an executive coach, a speaker. I do leadership team and organization development consultant. I'm also, you'll see that Michelle Bennett is also on the call today. We are a fellow co-facilitators and faculty members with the Integrative Enneagram Solutions organization that teaches the Enneagram to practitioners to certify them to change the world. And that is ultimately what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to change the world to make it much more inclusive, much more better understood about ourselves, better understanding of others, and really learning from everyone and integrating everything that they have, the knowledge and perspectives and insights that they have into our current own mindsets so we can expand them and be much better human beings. And the world needs that right now.
Yeah, I love that, that mission of changing the world. And
Mhm.
changing the world, I heard you use the word in a to include everyone, to be inclusive, and changing the world through learning from each other. And
Yes.
so, I mean, the world has changed a lot. And
Yes, it has.
we were talking about that before. It's changed a
Mhm.
lot. It's changed a lot. And the change in your world is this explicit expectations. Your new,
Yes.
yeah. I want to hear, that title is so it's so catchy. There's the alliteration, explicit.
Mhm.
After explicit, anything could happen, right? And there you
Yeah.
plug in expectations. It's a beautiful
Mhm.
title. So tell us a little bit about that explicit expectations and how does it work for leaders?
Thank you. And yes, so what I came to realize is that people perceive the world, and this has been something that's been known by philosophers for centuries and thousands of years. People perceive the world through their own lens, right? And that means something. That means that they think that their way is the only way, usually. They perceive the world one way and they're thinking that this is what everyone else is also seeing because I am seeing this, so therefore everyone is also seeing it. So if we're using ourselves as the focal point, as the main way of perceiving the reality and not looking at other perspectives, we're not understanding other people's perceptions, perspectives, expectations, likes, dislikes, whatever it is. And you mentioned in the introduction that we're looking to relearn, unlearn, and relearn things. And I think that what I've come to realize is that the whole concept and that dependence on the golden rule is at the crux of why people keep thinking that other people will think like they will and they'll like the same things that they will. Because that's been taught ad nauseum in every single capacity in schools, in churches, in corporations, in marketing advertisements for hotels, that the golden rule is the way to be. And the reality is, yes, absolutely, the golden rule could work with the caveat that everyone is exactly the same. And I think we've come to realize and recognize that not everyone is exactly the same. So we need to unlearn the golden rule and go to a more productive and effective way of thinking about things, and more inclusive and more integrative. And that would be a platinum rule. So we all know the golden rule is do unto others as you'd have done unto you, or treat others the way that you want to be treated. And again, that would only work if everyone is exactly the same background, same likes, same history, same perspectives, same ideology, same values, same religion. And we know that that's not the case. So looking to see what else is out there, and focusing and taking the time and focus and energy to really look at how do other people perceive the world. Also, what value does that add, right? What additional value? What am I not seeing by just looking at the world through my blinders? So not looking at the world through my fixated state, but looking and seeing what other people want and need. And that's where the explicit expectations come in, because each of us has expectations about something, and we believe that other people know what we want because they're human beings, they're like us, they're going to know what we want. But we never voice them. If we don't voice them, people don't know what those expectations are. And it goes multiple ways. So a leader may have explicit expectations of their direct reports, of their team members, but never tells them. The direct reports think that they know what the leader wants because this is how they figured it out and what makes sense to them. But they never tell the leader what their expectations are of the leader for support, for guidance, for direction, for whatever it is. And then the leader in turn has no idea what the expectations are of the organization or of their manager, their boss, because those are never made truly explicit. And the understanding is never really looked at to make sure that people understand what those are. So that's where it really came from. It's how do we make these implicit expectations that we have, that we believe other people know, or that we have of them, how do we make those explicit? How do we share that in a way that's not threatening, that's not demeaning, that still has respect and dignity for the individuals, and that we continue to check in? Because these things will change. These expectations will change. Because as you said, we're going through a lot of change right now. We've seen a lot of change, and that change will continue. And as change happens, expectations and realities will also change along with those. So, how do we make sure that people know what's going on in our minds? Because the other thing we know is people are not mind readers.
They should be.
That would make life easier and scarier.
And scarier. And as you were talking about this, sharing the context in which this explicit expectations where it comes from, there are a number of things that jumped into my mind. So let's take them one at a time. It seems like performance management systems just
Oh, yeah.
they go out to the door because they're not explicit, right? So we can,
No.
but yeah. So I know talk about that a little bit. Share a little bit about that perspective.
they're they're deceptively falsely explicit because you come up with these artificial goals at some point, or even think about strategies for an organizations in just 10, 15 years ago, people were saying, oh, let's come up with our 10-year plan. No one can come up with a 10-year plan now because you have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. let alone in 10 years or 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. So we're seeing strategic planning efforts being far shorter than they used to be because all these contingencies need to be taken into consideration. So performance management, theoretically, and what is actually being done and practically, is tied to the strategic plan and saying these are going to be our major initiatives. This is the direction we're going in. These are our major projects in order to be able to achieve these initiatives and these goals and these strategies that we have laid out for us. And traditionally, they're done once, right? Performance management. Oh, let's set your goals for the year. And then they're never revisited. And then things change. And by the way, performance management is very much focused on individuals. What's your individual performance management. And what we're seeing is more and more people are dependent on not only one team, but multiple teams to be able to function and collaborate in organizations. So that's not taken into account either. So we're seeing, of course, that organizations are are becoming aware of this and throwing the traditional performance management system out in favor of more coaching that happens by the leader or the manager, and more frequent check-ins and more meetings to see, okay, hold on a second. There's been a change in direction. There's been a new competitor has emerged. This drug has failed. It hasn't been approved by the FDA. We need to change. So the goals that we set last year for this year are no longer relevant. So we shouldn't be holding people accountable to that. The other thing that we're seeing, or we have seen, is that everything was based on the what, the results, the
Yeah.
achievement, the accomplishment. And very little focus was made on the how, the
Yeah.
values, the behaviors that were important. So what we're seeing is people who are focused on, oh, if I meet this goal that was set for me, this what, I'm going to get money. I'm going to get a bonus. I'm going to get a promotion. I'm going to get whatever. And it doesn't matter that I leave a trail of dead bodies in my wake because no one's evaluating me on that. I met my what. Who cares about the how?
Okay.
Right? So we have all these challenges with performance management because these expectations are not made explicit, that changes will happen, direction will happen, goals will change, our behaviors are going to be taken into account. We can't just be focusing on these static things. They need to be able to change.
It's so, what you said is so powerful. And it's really what we've, that whole thing, management by objectives and the behavior that it brings about. As you said, a trail of bodies, people climbing up on top of each other for
Mhm.
competition. This idea of bonuses being tied to what's, and I love the idea of the how, because the core values of the company usually take up very little space on those performance. So there's
Mhm.
a culture that's being espoused, and the real culture is driven by those bonuses that are tied to the achievement.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks about how are you achieving it. So I love that. And
Yeah.
thanks for that little bit about performance, because it really echoes a lot of my thoughts around it. And the second
Mhm.
thing that came to mind when you were speaking about explicit expectations is that there needs to be a space for the expression to happen.
Yes.
Would you recommend that a leader create space
Yeah.
for that exchange to happen? Because usually leaders talk and say, this is what I want,
Yes.
and they believe that we're mind readers.
Yes, that's a great question. And the reality, and I think the only solution, is to have those consistent open communications to make sure that leaders, managers, supervisors are checking in with their team members to see what's going on for you, what are you working on, is it in alignment with the direction? Oh, that's changed. Don't worry about this. This doesn't matter anymore because these other moving parts have moved. And this is no longer relevant. We really need to be focusing on this. So don't waste your time on this. Now we're going in this direction. So really to make sure that the clarity is there. And that's one of the 7 C's that I mentioned in the book about being really important for the success of a manager or leader with their team is to have that clarity, so that to make sure that the clarity exists, clarity of expectations, clarity of goals, clarity of priorities, clarity in what are you doing and do you have the right resources to do it so that you're not wasting resources or time, right? So I think that creation of space for meetings that happen on a regular basis rather than just leaving people that laissez-faire environment. Oh, they know what they're doing. We hired good people. They know what they do. Leave them alone. Yes, they don't want to be micromanaged. That's one end of the spectrum. But the other end of the spectrum is, you know, so total freedom, laissez-faire, let them run rampant without any direction. Of course, they're not going to meet expectations. What's a good mid ground where people don't feel micromanaged? They feel that they're included, that their insights, their expertise is valued, and that their voice is heard to be able to contribute to the goals of the organization with directionality, right? This is don't, we're that's not even a product of ours. That's not even an area that we're in. What are we in? What are we working towards? So that needs to be a fine balance. And I think that continuous open communication between the leader and their team members, their individual team members, is critical in making sure those explicit expectations are there and everyone knows what they should be working on and how they should be working on it. And obviously, we start with why. Always start with why. Why is this what we should be working on?
Yeah.
Right?
In that explanation, I get a sense of pace, like it's fast. Last month we said we're going to do X, and now everything on the market has changed, and we're going to do Y. And
Yes.
it's so crazy, right? Because like I worked with a client in the humanitarian world in January, and when the whole USAID situation was happening, they were like, we don't know where we're getting funding from. So they had to
Yeah.
immediately change their strategy. And so
Yep.
that change was met with some bit of panic, some bit of skepticism, some bit of doubt. And I'm just wondering how then, because it will happen in the organization as well.
Hmm.
Last month we worked in this, but as the example you gave, that new drug, it didn't pass FDA. So we need to scratch that and go again. How
Yeah.
do you deal with the fallout from that? Because people are not, we talk about change, but we don't like change. And I found
Yeah.
that in organizations, as you go down
Hmm.
the lower levels, and people want they want some stability.
Yes.
That notion of we need to change today and next month we're going to change, it can be very tiring for a staff member. But
Yes.
so how then do we manage that, even though we know
Hmm.
we're driving towards new goals almost every month or every 6 months? So
Right.
what are your suggestions around that?
So I think we're going back. So just like we talked about the golden rule earlier, something that needed to be the myth that needed to be busted, and how do we make it actually apply? And we talked about going to the platinum rule, treat others the way that they want to be treated. And ultimately, by the way, the rhodium rule, integrate that knowledge into our own worldview so we can expand it and be a better human being and have
I
that.
want to talk about that after. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in this situation, it's we have another myth to be debunked. Way back, and this is the Lewin change model about things are working a certain way. We're funded by a certain company. This is or situation, and things are great. This is the way it is until it's not. And
Yes.
then something happens to change. So we're frozen in a way of doing something. Then something happens. We need to unfreeze the way that we were previously doing it, relying on this place for funding, relying on these customers, relying on this money, whatever it is. So a new leader, new technology, new whatever it is. So the disruptor happens. So we unfreeze from the way that we were doing things or what we were relying on in the past, and then implement whatever new change needs to happen. And then we refreeze into that brand new way, expecting, great, this is the new stability. This will be wonderful. We can operate like this for as long as we were working on in the past. We'll have the same expectation that we're going to be operating in this new way for another 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever the amount of time was in the past that we were working the old way in that frozen way. The reality is there is no more freezing. There's no more refreezing, right? Because the rate of change is so high. We've talked about, the VUCA environment and the Bani environment. We talked about all that. That contributes to all this chaos that's constantly happening that we cannot refreeze into a certain way because it's not taking into consideration all these other new elements that are popping up and happening all the time all around us. So what we do need to focus on is, and I like to call it slush, right? It's no longer a frozen state, it's a slushy state. So there will be some things that are solid pieces of ice that we can latch onto, but most of it is going to be slushy that we have to trod through. It's not going to be pretty, it's going to be messy. And the solid pieces of ice within the slush, because slush does contain some solid pieces of ices within it, are our mission. Why are we here? So always focusing on the why. So that's the only way to get through these massive changes is to say, let's regroup. Let's look at the why. Why are we here? Also look at our values. And Simon Sinek was big on this, right? So start with why, then go to the how, and you'll finally end up with a what. And the what may be totally different from what you may have thought it was going to be when you started. And if you include everyone and their expertise and their strengths and gifts that they have in co-creating the final what, it might be even better than what you thought it would be, right? Because that's why you have these people. You brought these people in because they have that diversity of skill set and mindset and perspective and gifts and talents to be able to deal with any situation like what we're dealing with right now. So the way to get through it, to answer your original question, is to really double down and focus on the why. Why are we here? And let's look at our values. So let's focus on looking at our values, how we will get through this, and then let's create the what.
Yeah. You know, it's such a, it's really like an upside down moment. When you're talking about it, I got the image of, you know, that Ice Age character with the nut, right? The squirrel with the nut who's always using the nut and tumbling over. I got the impression of, I saw that very live in my mind. And then I was thinking how much now the corporate the corporate system is more aligned with the individual system, in that driving
Yes.
individuals to get to our highest power. We talk about
Mm-hmm.
relinquishing control. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about finding our own personal purpose for being on earth. And we talk about how we want to be. And we start to move away from believing the what. So, you know, it's no longer about I want to have a house. It's about I want to have a home that will provide warmth and comfort for, and that home could
Yeah.
be, it could be a bar, it could be an apartment, but, you know, the values and the why. And I'm just thinking
Mm-hmm.
how amazing it is that in this chaos, there's a sort of purity, right? Because a lot of that was lost in corporate by all the structures and all the
Yes.
and it just really comes back to, in the midst of the chaos, we need to find our why and our purpose and live by our core values.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that and as difficult as that.
And it's really the only way to survive and thrive. And it's, as you said, it's as difficult as that because finding a community, an organization, an environment that aligns exactly with your own personal values. After, by the way, after you figure them out for yourself, right? Because a
Yeah.
lot of people don't take the time and introspection and have the self-awareness to figure out what is it that my values are. Let me write them down, right? And then find my tribe where I can fit in there and I'd be supported and safe and comfortable, secure. And going back to what you're saying earlier, the individual rewarding by the organizations don't necessarily reward every individual. As we found out, as Michelle and I have found, and we co-facilitate these training programs around the Enneagram, different people are motivated by different things.
Yeah.
And organizations traditionally, especially in the West, are focused on rewarding only a third of the different motivation types that are out there, mostly focused on money and advancement and contributions and achievements. Well, achievements more than contributions. They want the achievements and the goals met. So it's always about the what, and again, rarely about the how.
Yeah.
And so we're missing out on six out of those nine um, groups of people out there because their motivations are never met and they're assumed, right? There's an assumption by the leaders who, by the way, were promoted because of their extroverted assertiveness about saying, I want to be a leader, I want this role, let me succeed, let me put myself out there, let me tell you what my needs are, and this is thank you, I got the job now. So they expect other people to have that same motivation as they do. In succession planning, I've worked with companies with succession planning. It is incredible to me to see leaders say, oh, this person wants to be a VP in this area because this is the route that I took. And this is what obviously they're going to want as well. Well, did you talk to them?
Yeah.
Is that really what they want? Do they like their job? Do they want to go somewhere else? Do they want to stay in that role for a while? Is there something going on in their family that prevents them from moving into this job? No conversation at all. It's just an assumption based on how they are. Golden rule, right? The
Yeah.
golden rule. If I wanted this, this is my path. This is what they should want as well.
Yeah.
So it really comes down to really understanding, putting out, these are my expectations. What are your expectations? Oh, okay, you want something else. Wonderful. We do have a need for that in the other part of this company or organization or whatever. Let me help you make that happen so that we can continue engaging rather than disengaging our people.
Yeah, it's I think it's a sort of beautiful moment um in terms of the chaos. It's a beautiful moment because there is this sort of return to self, and I'm using self for the organization itself as well. A lot of times, you know, our mission and vision statements are things you write on the wall and nobody remembers.
Mhm.
And now what you're saying is that this is what we need to remember on a daily
Exactly.
basis. And this is what we need to pull people back to in our meetings, the why of it, even though the what may be changing. And I think
Yes.
that is it's such a homing moment for a lot of organizations and a point of reflection. Because sometimes a vision or mission statement was done 20 years ago
Yeah.
and never revisited.
Hmm.
20 years ago, the leader was a particular person who would have driven that
Hmm.
vision or probably created it himself
Hmm.
or herself. And
More
now,
likely a himself.
most likely himself. And now, 20 years later, when we're looking at
Yeah.
how do we survive in this time, is that,
Yeah.
and a lot of organizations do not revisit their vision and their mission.
Right. To update it to make sure that it's relevant. And sometimes it will be. Maybe
Sometimes
it was it was generic enough or aspirational enough that it would still be relevant. And it's so important because the other thing about it is that making sure that it's not only relevant, that it's the right how, that it's the right values, but that they're real. Because a lot of times, as you've seen, people will slap a poster on a wall or a background on a Zoom call that say this is how we work. This is like, yay, we're great. And the reality is the culture is not representative at all of those because that's not how things are done in the organization. So making sure that it's real, that the and what is the real culture? What are the real values? And do those align with the individuals?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important that that sort of reconfiguration of how we lead and how we measure performance and how we operate on a
Mhm.
daily basis. I'd like to recognize Michelle. You did refer to her and more than once in your conversation. So Michelle, is
Mhm.
there anything you want to add to the conversation or any questions that you want to ask?
So, thank you, and I'm so enjoying the conversation. One thing I was actually just about to put it into the chat on your topic of the values of an organization, and some of the organizations that I've gone to that have the values on the wall that are literally they stick in my mind to this day, and they're clients that I saw 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, and their values on the wall are short and they have verbs in them and they speak to every age group in the organization. And I think that, companies get stuck into this long, flowery, we desire to make the customer so happy by doing it. It's like everybody's fallen
Mhm.
asleep before they've got to the end of the what the company's really wanting to say. So I think people need to be really brave in shortening and saying what they mean to the point. So when you look at it, it looks what it says and it says what it looks like. So I really appreciated that. I think that's a big way to grow culture in a company when you've got those kinds of motivations, and they are. Values should be motivations, what we're driven to do, what we're desiring to do, and what we won't settle for anything less than that.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I'm enjoying this thoroughly.
Lovely
Thank you,
contribution.
Michelle. And they have to be true. Those have to be true. Those have to be real ones that the company really aligns with, and actually you can see that it's being done that way, as opposed to, oh, it's an aspirational thing that we'll just put on the wall.
Yeah.
And we're not going to pay attention to it, but we had to come up with it because this OD consultant came in and we paid them a lot of money to make this happen.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it, right? So I want to just we're talking about the organization. I want to focus a little bit about the people who are in charge. So because a lot of things that you shared about the VP whose career went this way and this is what they want for their people. The leader
Hmm.
who says, well, still operating from the golden rule, haven't really
Hmm.
gotten them yet. And so what is the journey for that leader who's still operating from
Yeah.
performance? This is a performance management for my team. And if my team scores high, I get a lovely bonus. You know,
Yeah.
how are you gonna start a conversation with someone to tell them, hey, we're not focusing on the what, the how and the why. This is where we want to navigate to. What does that conversation look like?
So a lot of times the best way to get into to changing a leader's minds and behaviors is to help them with a pain point that they have. Because more than likely, a leader that's approaching things from a golden rule perspective is not going to be having a very engaged, motivated team and is probably going to be experiencing some attrition and turnover, right? So if you get to them with the pain point, this is the pain point. Your engagement scores are low, your turnover is high, and as a result, your achievement of your targeted results may not be, you may not be hitting the mark on that. You may actually be missing it, or you could actually be doing a lot better, right? So if you meet the leader where their pain point is and say, let's look at how are you really understanding what your people need? I mean, the whole Spice Girls song, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Have you had that conversation with your team members, right? So do you know what motivates each and every member of your team? And a lot of times the Enneagram isn't too explicit in explicit expectations, but it's baked in there. But the Enneagram is a great way to get to that because we can do an exercise and ask them, like, tell me what motivates people. And we can just plot it. And this is especially effective when you do it with a team, a leadership team, where their peers are there, their colleagues are there, and they're each calling out things about what motivates people. And then you're plotting it in the diagram, in the circle, and then putting them into the categories of what they are. So once you come up with these 9 categories that they've told you, by the way, they if they think about it, they can come up with what motivates people. They know this, but they never thought about it really. And they never thought that each one of my team members is going to have one of these as a primary. Or they never thought about this one is my primary. Oh, and my colleague isn't this one, it's this other one. Oh, and my leader is a totally third one. Or maybe they might have a couple people that have the same motivation. But the reality is they'll start seeing that the differences that they know are there, but they never really addressed with their team members are going to show up in this circle and they will now say, I've been leading people the wrong way. I've been meeting them at the wrong point. Or I haven't been meeting them because we haven't connected on what their true motivation is, what they really, really want. So how do I have these conversations with each of my team members or family members, because that can also apply with their interpersonal relationships at home, not only just the business, to become more effective by understanding where they're coming from and why they're exhibiting the behaviors that they're exhibiting. And a lot of team building tools out there are all about the behaviors, but we have no idea the why behind it, right? Always start with the why. And the Enneagram helps to highlight this is why this person is behaving this way. This is the reason or the intent or the desire or the motivation, the driver behind this behavior. And the same behavior may have a whole bunch of different motivations behind it. But going by the golden rule, we might see the behavior and ascribe what we think it is based on our perspective, which I can tell you is going to be 100% wrong. The fundamental attribution error at play. Yeah.
So step 1 is to raise the leader's awareness of his or her own motivation style.
Exactly.
By extension, they begin to imagine what that motivation style will be for the people who are on their team or the people who are on their leadership team as well. So that raised awareness naturally brings different questions. Because if Karl is different from me, then I begin to say, then maybe I may have been using the wrong carrot for Karl's motivation.
And the warning here or the caution here is that they really need to verify and validate that. So actually use an instrument to make sure they have the conversation, they have the team all together so that each team member understands how each other team member wants to be worked with, how they're motivated, what their hot buttons are. All those different things come into play. And that's where you're going to get a much better team that works better together. And you know how to motivate each and every single one of them differently. Situational leadership, right? We talked about situational leadership. This is ultimately situational leadership because you're looking at each individual person overall, as well as in their employee life cycle and what their needs might be and how different those might be at those different points.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, is there a motivation style that is more difficult, or I should say that leaders are less accustomed to playing towards? So, I mean, if you're
Hmm.
motivated by money or status, that's easy because organizations are structured for that.
Exactly.
But is there a
Hmm.
motivation style that really calls for a leader to be a little more creative, slow down
Yeah.
a little bit more? What are those?
I love your use of the word creative because that's probably, if I had to pick one, and by the way, there is no one style, motivation type or style that's better than any other. All of
Right.
them are equally valid, and we need all of them because we need the full 360-degree perspective.
Yeah.
What we see organizations not able to do is meet the needs of our type fours. And they tend to be those creatives. They're much more about authenticity and wanting to be different, unique, and special, and bringing that genuineness to work. And we don't usually see that in for-profit organizations. I'm going to couch that with for-profit organizations. In nonprofits and creative and arts, you'll be able to achieve that more and better than you will in our traditional for-profit, what we think of as a regular, as an organization when we think about it, right?
Yeah. You know, I've seen that and I've worked with that. And for the creative people who were in my team who were really working in I used to run a strategic department of an organization. And really people who were creative, what I had to do is sort of teach them to use their creativity differently.
Mhm.
Because they saw the job as this. And I would have to say, well, creating a poll could be creative. Why don't you go and hold a forum with people, get their ideas, and use their ideas to create something? Even
Mhm.
people who were tangible creators in terms of, well, let's do more posters, let's do a newsletter, let's disseminate information different ways. So as their leader, I really had to come up with a lot of ways in which I could use her talents because she was
Mhm.
very, very frustrated by the job. And I
Yeah.
think that's it did take a lot out of her because there was this disbelief that this job can't give me anything. And it took a lot out
Mhm.
of me because I had to step out of my box and say, okay, well, maybe we could do this and we could do this. And there's part of it, I think, which is around the permission because
Yeah.
I had to give her a lot of permission and keep reinforcing that she had permission to do what she wanted to do. So
Right.
there's a lot of tension between what the organization says we could do and what
Yeah.
people permission to do. And that explicit expectation of saying, I freely give
Mhm.
you permission is met with doubt.
Yes. And it depends on the culture of the organization. So I've seen that happen when we have our more risk averse
Yeah.
organizations or cultures. People are going to feel less empowered or less, even if their leader comes to them and says, I'm empowering you to do this, they're going to be, yeah, I don't think you are. I've seen what happened. I saw what happened to Joe over there
Yeah.
when they went and they did this and then it went wrong and then you didn't have their back and you said that they were empowered and now they're out of the company or now they're, no longer allowed to participate in these teams or these groups. And yeah, I don't believe you, right? So it's really looking at how can we truly align with what we're saying? And if we can't, then don't say it,
Yes, I agree.
right? If that, then that's not real.
I agree.
Then you're not really willing to empower. You need to
Yeah.
change the culture or admit that this is our culture and we're going to have to work with it
Yeah.
and attract people that are interested in working in this type of a culture and understand that's the way it's going to be. And
Yeah.
the reality is, no, we need to really expand it. We need to,
Yeah.
otherwise, people are not going to, it's a culture of fear ultimately, and we don't want to have that.
Yeah. I agree
No
with
one wants to work in that.
I agree with you because one of the things that I had to do is sort of ring fence my team because other leaders were coming and saying, what are you doing? Why do they have so much freedom? Our team members are not happy with it because they're looking in and saying, why can't we? So we're not happy with
Hmm.
you. And my team, they
Yeah.
loved it because they were sort of showing off about it. And at the same time, they were saying, well, when you leave, things are going to be different.
Yeah.
It really is, and that whole culture piece and going for I think what really strikes me about this conversation is the reminder of how important vision is and that
Hmm.
purpose is. And very often you said profit and not for profit. And sometimes we're so driven by the need for profit.
Yes.
We're not thinking about our purpose. In fact, our
Hmm.
purpose is to give a return to our shareholders, right? You often see that in the
Hmm.
vision statement or mission statement to create wealth for our investors. And that
Yeah.
becomes the factor for everything else. I mean, I'm not sounding very capitalistic today, but it really is something that really concerns me because
Yes.
this idea of vision and the how, the why and the how instead of the what, it really stands in conflict with a lot of what we're seeing in organizations.
Yes.
And maybe that's why this entire change in the world, since the pandemic, has been change after change after change. And of course, being a US citizen, the White House emanates across the world. And so we're seeing a lot of change. We're not getting into that, but we've seen a lot of change, right, in our systems. And this idea of what versus why and how, it just really strikes me how much clash and tension that's going to continue to create in our systems. And yeah, okay, I'm off my soapbox.
Your soapbox is accurate, though. And I think the other realization that people don't have is that they expect that the focus on the what is going to produce what they are hoping it's going to produce. When the reality is that if you focus on the why and the how, you're going to get an even bigger what. Your what can be even larger than what you ever imagined. If you start with the why, have the right how, your what is going to be something you didn't even imagine, and it's going to be even larger and better, and feeding into the capitalistic expectations that you may have, it'll actually be bigger and better. And I think that's been proven.
Yeah. And so it comes back again, the word emerge keeps coming up for me when you speak, right? So if we focus on the why and the how, then what is going to emerge is going to be beyond our mere expectations.
Exactly.
And I can't help but say how spiritual this is for me. Listening to you talk, there's an element of spirituality embedded in there because that's what we learn, right? When we go on our spiritual journeys, we focus on our purpose and the way we are in the world, and the world opens up in the abundance that is beyond our imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And what a moment to be a corporate citizen because we don't think about spirituality in our organizations, right? We don't think about it. And what you're saying really is about spirituality, leaving control, letting go of control, seeing what emerges, focus on our core values, because nobody's core value is to be a tyrant, right? Focus on our core values.
You don't know that.
I am making an explicit expectation that nobody's core values is to be tyrannical, but it may be.
So I'm going to say that no healthy person explicit expectations are to be a tyrant. Unhealthy, that might be the case. Yes.
Right. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, so let's get the healthy ones, right? But it would be lovely if the healthy ones of us could really live from that, because that is, when we take spiritual journeys, I should say when I took my spiritual journey, that's what really came up for me. That idea of I want this and I want that. It was like, no, focus on your purpose for being here. Do your podcast as part of your purpose and focus on how you live your life and how you treat others like they want to be treated and how you treat yourself, right? So what you're saying here is it's like so blow mind for me because it's that's the word that comes up, right? Let's see what emerges from our behavior and living from our purpose. And it's so beautiful. So thank you, Karl.
Oh, you're welcome,
Thank
Maxine.
you for that. That's what it evokes for me, a sense of spirituality.
Yeah, and it's the universe. It's the universe, like paying attention to the universe as opposed to just one little aspect that you're focusing on, which is yourself, right? Expand it. Let the universe in and find out what the universe has to offer you to make you a better human being, a better person, a healthier, more integrated person that will not lead you to be a tyrant in an unhealthy state or a disintegrated or unintegrated state. So that's really what we should all be striving for. learning from others and community. I think community is the another way of getting through all the challenges that our current world is throwing at us. So
Yes.
really finding the community where we feel safe, where we feel understood, trying to expand it and grow it to create more understanding and comprehension and empathy, and integrating all that.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about what does that do for the word competition? Because community is not competitive. And we've grown up in a
Mm,
space where to be in corporate, one of the things to do your SWOT analysis, you have to look at what your
mhm.
competitors doing. And we actually use the word threat, right? The threat, the language
Yeah,
is so, threat, competitive.
yeah,
So that's just like really changing everything, Carl.
yeah. It is. It's just looking at how can we create the best value and change, positive change in the world, and let the profits follow. The profits will follow. Let's not focus on the profits. Let's focus on why we're here and how we're going to work together, and we will achieve amazing things. We may not know what those things are, but we will achieve amazing things.
Yeah, I started off this program talking about unlearning and debunking, and whoa, you've just like thrown a lot of things into the mix. I think the organization is going to shut down and rebuild. Yeah, it's been beautiful. I love it. Michelle, do you want to just pop in and share any thoughts that you have?
Thank you so much, Maxine. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And Carl, as always, I just learn so much from you every time I get the opportunity to engage with you. And one of the topics that we're all facing, we want to change the world. We want to make it a better place. And your question, Maxine, was so poignant. How do we start that conversation? And Carl, you were so right. You got to start with that pain point. But also, and also, and I use that very often, but also having the conversation with leaders about how important is it for your organization to adapt to your customer. If you don't
Mhm.
adapt to your customer, what will happen? That customer will leave. And that's
Yeah.
what happens in organizations that don't get to know their team members. The team members leave.
Mhm.
And and as we go into this work, and it's such beautiful work because people do genuinely want to enjoy their workspace. It's where they spend so much time
Mhm.
in their lives. And one of my biggest drives in all of it is that teams need to have more human being conversations and less human doing conversations because they only have human doing conversations.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually take time. This is what leaders also need to know. It doesn't take time.
Mhm.
It can be just seeing somebody at the coffee machine and saying, "Hi, how are you?" and actually caring about the person's
Yes.
response, as opposed to going, "Hey, how's it going?" and moving on. How was your weekend? That's it. Or if you
Yeah.
know the person's Enneagram style and you know what kind of language will kind of turn on the green buttons, that's it. Leaders think, oh my gosh, now I've got to go and do rainbows and fairy dust with my team members, and it's going to take up so much time and so much budget. No, it doesn't. If you start with the basics, and Carl, the work that you've done, the books that you've written are just amazing. And there's such fundamentals for leaders around the world. And I really just appreciate you inviting me on this platform today, or I snuck into your podcast. But
I
I
love
thoroughly
it.
enjoyed from you both.
Again, we created the why and the how, and we had no idea what the what was going to be. So the what was exactly appropriate, right? The what was exactly appropriate. And I love, Michelle, you brought up the point about your stakeholders, your customers, right? And again, what are their explicit expectations? What are their needs? What are their pain points? What do they expect from you? And how do you know that? I remember there was a whole bunch of companies that went golden rule. Like, oh, we know what our customers want. We know best for what our customers want. I think Qantas was one of them. Starbucks was one of them. Uh, and they were failing until they paid attention to the customer. They went platinum rule, and then they went rhodium rule and integrated that and changed the way that they were focusing on what the needs were. They now knew what the needs were of the customer. They integrated into the way they did business, and then they ended up being so successful.
Yeah, I think that's, and so what you've done there is you've brought us right back full circle with those examples. Really proven the point. I mean, that's the proof, right? That's the proof that this way works. So going our rogue way and doing what we think the customer wants because we have the PhDs and we have the MBAs, right? So we
Hmm.
know. And realizing that again, the profit speaks for itself, saying no, that's not what your customer wants. Get back in line, find out what they want and integrate it, and then you'll get the profits. And it's so amazing, because one of the things you've kept saying, Carl, is that the profits will follow. So focus on our why, focus on our what. I mean, sorry, on our how, because our how is about our people, right? How we treat them,
Hmm.
how they, whatever. And they're the ones who actually drive all our processes. And then the what, i.e., our profit, whatever it is that we think our what is, will follow. And so that's a little bit a big change in the way that we're going to do things going forward.
Absolutely. It's a total change in mindset and culture for organizations to not focus on gold.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't focus on gold because if you focus on gold, you're going to get gold. But don't you want the platinum?
absolutely. Goal is to 2020. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think I think I'm full. I'm good.
Hmm.
And so I want
Thank
to
you.
thank you for your time, Carl. And Carl, how can people get in touch with you or follow you so they'll know where to get all your wisdom?
Well, thank you, Maxine. So my website is performandfunction.com. It's kind of a play on the word form and function, but it's performandfunction.com, all spelled out. I'm also on LinkedIn as R. Karl Hebenstreit, and you can always send me an email to Karl, Karl, at performandfunction.com. And my books are all on Amazon, and they're available at bookstores, and they're on Ingram Spark. So there are many ways to get the different books, and there are a couple different books. Explicit Expectations, of course, is the one we were speaking about today. There's also a book that's more relevant to the Enneagram called The How and Why, Taking Care of Business with the Enneagram. And there's a children's book for people that have no knowledge yet about the Enneagram, but want to dip their toe in and figure out a little bit more about it. And it's Nina and the Really, Really Tough Decision. And that's available in 4 languages. It's in English, it's in Spanish, it's in French, and it's in Greek.
Wow. That's amazing. So thank you, Carl. And we just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And of course, let's focus on our why and our how and the what's are going to follow. So thank you. We'll be here again next month with a brand new guest. If you have any suggestions, we'd love to hear it. Thank you so much, Carl. And thank you, Michelle, for being part of our conversation today. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you again, Maxine. Thank you, Michelle.
Good.